Hello and welcome to the Inside the Birds pregame show. Geoff Mosher, Adam Caplan, and of course, Greg Cosell, who joins us every year to help us break down the tape and preview the game. And this is a big game. For week 3, it is. The Eagles will go down to New Orleans, play the New Orleans Saints at the Superdome in New Orleans. The Saints are rolling 2-0, scoring 40 points in both of their first 2 games. The Eagles are reeling 1-1, coming off a Monday night loss to the Falcons, a heartbreaking 22-21 loss. So that makes for a very interesting game to break down. Real quick, because I know Adam and I have discussed this, Greg. I don't know if you've ever been there or talked to coaches about it, but the Superdome itself is worth a very quick discussion about how much of a home field advantage that is for the Saints when they are even mediocre to good. When they're bad, not so much, but that is a very, very loud environment that even good teams can get caught up in. Have you had that same experience
Well,
or
I've never been
conversation?
to a Saints home game, but I've been to Super Bowls there.
Mm,
So I've been in the stadium. So again, I can't speak to what the crowd sounds like for a Saints home game, but I know from going back, being here at Films for 45 years, and back in the day with the Who Day, back when they had the great defenses and were a playoff team for a number of years in a row. They had the Pat Swillings, the Ricky Jacksons. I know I'm leaving out great players. Those were just two names that came to mind immediately. Sam Mills,
Juan Johnson.
Vaughn Johnson. That was the linebackers in there 3-4. I know that it was really a very, very difficult place for visiting teams.
yes. And as we talked about on the podcast, Adam and I did that dropped on Friday morning, the Eagles have not had a whole lot of success there in the past 20 years. So now the Saints come in high flying and the Eagles come in having to get their stuff together. Let's really start talking about the injuries, which are not, at least for the Saints, very significant. Not many for the Eagles, but clearly a big one. Again, A.J. Brown is out for this game. According to the team's injury report, this will be the second straight game he misses with a hamstring injury. Third game overall. Anyone care to guess what the Eagles' record is when they don't have A.J. Brown in 2 games?
Probably 0-2, I would imagine.
Yeah, that's right. 0-2.
That
They
didn't seem
lost
like a tough question.
to the Falcons, and of course, they lost their playoff game to the Bucks at the end of 2023 when A.J. Brown couldn't play as well. Adam, we've seen hamstrings linger.
Yeah.
We know that you want to be cautious with this. It's early in the season, but we've also seen this Eagles offense without A.J. Brown. This has to be, I know everybody wants to talk about run defense, and we'll get to that, but this is one of the biggest concerns for the team at the moment.
Yeah, because all that he brings to the table, the physicality, the ability to go short, go deep. He's just a leader. Yeah, it's big, man. And I was hoping to see Marshawn Lattimore against A.J. Brown a little bit. And by the way, Marshawn Lattimore was cleared on Friday, so he's expected to play. The only player they'll be without the Saints is Colin Saunders. But getting back to the A.J. Brown situation, yeah, look, he hasn't even practiced, Geoff. He has not been on the field at all since he got hurt last Friday. Remember, they listed him as questionable last Saturday, then they downgraded him. The Eagles are one of the few teams that doesn't downgrade players. Typically, they rarely do before a game, but they did. They did downgrade him from questionable to out on Sunday, which was the day before the Monday night game. So, yeah, and then you got the Gardner Johnson thing, which we'll talk about in a minute. But yeah, and I'd love to get, Greg's. We actually didn't talk to him about this. Did you notice anything coverage wise with that A.J. Brown that the Falcons did, and anything noticeable in the tape?
No, because I imagine what they might have done with A.J. Brown there was play A.J. Terrell, line him up over him.
Yeah.
So obviously they didn't have to do that because he
Yep.
wasn't out there. But
Sure.
my guess is that's what they would have done because usually, well, again, it's a new coaching staff. I know Ryan Nielsen, who was there last year as the DC and is now in Jacksonville. He is a heavy man defensive coordinator. He played a ton of man with the Saints a year ago. He's playing a ton of man through 2 games with the Jaguars. He certainly would have put AJ Terrell on Brown. I can't necessarily speak for Jimmy Lake or Raheem Morris. Raheem Morris is not as much of a man defensive coach as Ryan Nielsen, but you can still obviously put your best corner over a wideout when he's number one, meaning he's the widest receiver in the formation. You can still do that even if it's not pure man to man, because
Sure.
very often you just end up playing man on the outside, even if it's his own concept. So in that sense, they didn't have to do that.
Greg, we know that in absence of AJ Brown, we did see Jahan Dotson on the field. We did see Britton Covey on the field. We did see Johnny Wilson on the field. What I would like to ask you is what jumped out at you about who specifically mostly occupied the X position that AJ Brown normally plays? Or was it just a mishmash of
It was,
formational
yes, if I
diversity?
recall, it wasn't one person.
That's what I thought,
They don't have one guy that really is an X,
which we talked about.
other than AJ Brown, obviously.
Right. Well, that's what we talked about. AJ Brown not only plays the X and plays it at a high level, Greg and Adam, but he plays it with a physicality, with a way of imposing his will that you can't just stick a guy there who's an X receiver or not, either way, and say, oh, well, at least we have that filled and we can get that production.
And it allows you to line up in more 3-by-1 sets, which impacts how the defense then has to play it. So that's where the issue comes in. It's how the defense then has to defend you, because in a 3-by-3-by-1, I mean, so people know, you line up AJ Brown as what we call the boundary X, the single receiver to the short side of the field, and then there are 3 receivers to the wide side of the field, and that impacts how the defense plays. Because there might be some teams, and again, it might not have been the Falcons, because they might have felt very comfortable with AJ Terrell essentially playing 0 man and letting that boundary safety, cheat or poach, as the term is used, into the middle of the field to the trip side. They may well have done that. Obviously, we don't know because it didn't happen. But the point is, it can dictate defensive coverage, and then you understand how the defense is playing, and you're better able to attack it tactically.
Okay, we'll get into more of that offensive, flow and what they will do in this game against the Saints without AJ Brown. On the defensive side, CJ Gardner-Johnson is questionable. He had a foot injury that popped up throughout the week. It wasn't apparently from the game. It popped up in practice, but he missed both Thursdays and Fridays practice. Interestingly, they're listing him as questionable. He did tell reporters on his way out of the locker room, he didn't talk. He said, "See you Sunday." But Adam, you know that your experience when a guy misses, our experience when a guy misses Thursday and Friday practices, which are the big ones, that's usually not a great sign.
Yeah, more often than not, they don't play it, but it's not like he didn't practice at all this week. What happened is something happened after, because he was not listed Wednesday, but they listed him Thursday. And he didn't practice. So his foot was not, something happened leading up to Thursday's practice. So he's got to get it right. But man, this throws a quagmire because, Geoff, they're really light at safety. The big reason why Maddox played only safety in training camp is because they didn't have the depth. And if Gardner-Johnson can't play against his Fordham team, you're looking at Tristan McCullum, I would think.
Yeah, we kind of, Greg, went through what could the defense possibly look like if CJ Gardner-Johnson doesn't play, and we eventually settled on most likely the guy who practices is Tristan McCullum. Now, we know Isaiah Rodgers, if they wanted to maybe move Maddox to safety where he's practiced and Quinyon Mitchell inside in nickel and Isaiah Rodgers outside, they have that opportunity. But from what we've seen from Vic Fangio so far, he seems to rely on the veteran, the guys who are practicing in the spot. So I think we would think that Maddox will get the run at nickel and McCullum will be the second safety if CJ Gardner-Johnson can't play.
Yeah, I mean, I think against the Saints, you'd probably like to play the people that you feel comfortable that have practiced there, given that the Saints have speed and quality receivers. So I think that you'd be most comfortable with that.
All right, so let's talk about the Saints now. Adam, you mentioned no Colin Saunders. So Brian Brzee has stepped in. He's the second-year kid out of Clemson who was a first-round pick. Greg, I remember you breaking him down for us coming out of Clemson. You liked him. It's weird. He didn't start a lot of games. I think he had a family issue, if I recall
Yes,
correctly.
he did. Well, I believe his sister passed away while he was in college. And then he was injured a little bit. He was the #1 recruit coming out of high school in the country, not just at D-line, but in the entire country. He's played really well. He played well as a rookie a year ago. I mean, he plays 45, 50 snaps a game. He is a really good football player. And he is a big man, because I remember being at the Maxwell dinner, and he was the Maxwell winner coming out of high school, and he looked like a man coming out of high school.
Yeah, big kid. And he's played well for the Saints in
Very well.
Colin
Yes.
Saunders' spot.
Oh, no, he plays in all packages.
Okay.
I mean, he gets some snaps off. Obviously, he's not playing 70 snaps, but he plays a good 40 to 50 snaps a game, and he plays in all their packages.
All right. So that's basically the injury situation there for both teams. Not a lot, but obviously clearly for the Eagles, especially if CJ GJ can't go, that is a huge loss. Let's get into the Eagles defense against this Saints offense because let's face it, these are the two big storylines surrounding both teams. Eagles defense just being chewed up on the ground, especially against Atlanta, and then the high flying Saints offense, which has scored at least 40 points in both games. They have a new offensive coordinator, Clint Kubiak. We've talked about the Kubiak Shanahan system that you're now seeing New Orleans employ. Greg, what is that? I mean, I get it that when you hire a McVay Shanahan guy, it's usually a good sign for your offense. A lot of these guys are doing well around the league, but from what the Saints were to what they have been the first two games is a quantum leap that I don't think just one coordinator can automatically make that sustainable and happen. So what are you seeing from their offense that's really clicking so far?
Well, all you can talk about is what they look like on offense. I mean, whether this continues all through the season, we don't know the answer to that. But there's a couple of things that really stand out. Number one, and this is definitely the Kubiak factor, is they play under center more than they have in recent years. In fact, their play action pass game under center has been phenomenal through two games. Now, again, all I hope people understand all we're talking about is two games. We're not saying that, Derek Carr is the MVP of the league and, we've seen two games. They've been phenomenal with play action pass under center. Much of their offense, relatively speaking, by NFL standards, happens under center. The couple of other things that need to be talked about with their offense. Through two games, this offensive line has been phenomenal. It has arguably been the best offensive line in the league through two games. They're physical, they're athletic. When you see their zone run game, and we'll get into that because obviously that's one area the Eagles have struggled mightily. When you watch their O-line and their zone run game, they work to the second level. It is smooth, it is comfortable. Even journeyman like left guard Lucas Patrick, I mean, he looks like a totally different player. Eric McCoy is a really good center. They drafted Fuaga from Oregon State, who played right tackle in his two starting seasons at Oregon State. He's starting at left tackle. He's looked very, very good through two games. So their offensive line play really stands out. And I can't stress this enough, there's only a very few players in this league, no matter what 40 times are, that have terrifying speed. We know Tyreek Hill does. Rashid Shaheed has terrifying speed, and you have got to be really careful about him.
Yeah, and Adam, we've talked about this. I was under the impression, and I still might be, because as Greg just said, it's just two games in. I thought
Yeah.
this new offensive system was going to benefit Chris Olave the most. I thought I was going to get him some more yards after the catch type
Oh, it
routes,
will. Oh,
and
it
it will.
will.
It certainly will. But
Well,
right now, as
and
Greg
he's a
is
very good
mentioning,
receiver. I mean,
yeah.
I didn't mean to, by what I said, Geoff, it's not as if I'm dismissing
Oh,
Olave.
I know. I'm just setting it up on
Knows
Rashid.
he's a good receiver.
No doubt about it. I'm
Yeah.
setting it up though on Rashid, who has always been a vertical threat in this league, as you mentioned, with that blinding speed. And now, Adam, you're seeing it. What happens when you unlock him a little more and you can get the play action involved in the game that maybe wasn't there before. Not only with that, but also getting Derek Carr to throw it down the field.
Which he did, by the way. Both Shaheed and Olave had big plays last week. Olave had a 39-yarder, and Shaheed had the touchdown.
On essentially the same concept.
Oh, is that right? What was it, by the way?
It's kind of a post-cross
Okay.
combination. Yeah.
Okay. And think about this, Geoff. Carr only completed 11 passes for 243 yards. Okay, that to give you an
That's
idea,
unbelievable.
that's just you're talking about per completion. I mean, over 20 yards. It's ridiculous.
Right. Right. So
And by the way,
obviously,
the other reason for
Mhm.
Derek Carr, we have to mention him.
Yes.
It really helps him because it makes it easier to define reads. Play action from under center, even though you are turning your back, it really defines the reads better. It removes too much thinking. And it really helps Derek Carr because Derek Carr never had a problem throwing the football. That's not been the issue for Derek Carr. He can really throw the football. Just look at the long touchdown to Shaheed from last week. He can really throw the football down the field.
Absolutely. So let's talk about the construct of what they do offensively and how the Eagles might have
Yep.
to counter, Greg, because one thing that jumps out to me, maybe what's different than Atlanta, uh, is that New Orleans puts a fullback on the field, they put two tight ends on the field, they put heavier packages on the field that ordinarily might make a team like the Eagles go with a five-man front. But
Wow.
if they watch the tape of last week, which I'm sure they did, It's their job too. They'll notice that Atlanta played a lot of 3 wide receiver, a lot of 11 personnel, which kept the Eagles in a 4-man front, and the Eagles struggled, as we all saw, to stop the run out of a 4-man front. So I wonder if there's a cat and mouse
Well,
game.
what you have to decide is how you want to treat Taysom Hill. That's what you have to decide. I mean, he lines up and look, I study, but I'm not on the Eagles staff, and I can't study every snap of Taysom Hill the way someone in the Eagles, you know, in the Eagles office, a coach, a scout, whoever, a personnel guy is studying Taysom Hill, but he lines up as an I formation fullback, both in the straight eye and offset eye. He lines up as a wing tight end. He lines up as an eye back and carries the ball. He lines up as a detached wide receiver, at times off shifts. He lines up as a wildcat quarterback. He lines up in probably 7 or 8 different positions. Now, there's definitely going to be tendencies that requires more study, and I'm being honest, that I personally can have the time for. But I know my guess is when he lines up on the field with Foster Moreau, that you probably would treat him as a tight end, that they'd be in a 2 tight end set.
Mm-hmm.
That would be my guess, just from watching film for a lot of years and seeing what teams do. But, he lines up all over. So you have to decide first and foremost what your personnel is when he's on the field, because who is he on the field with? And secondly, how you choose to line up.
Is he a threat in the blocking game?
He's basically a threat in everything because he's just a good football player. I mean,
Okay.
he's one of those guys. He's just a good football player. He's not going to be a numbers guy, but he's just a good football player. He's a much more multiple version of the guys in the Greg Roman system who are essentially blockers, but who line up everywhere.
Right.
Okay. Patrick Ricard is obviously not going to carry the ball or catch the ball or even throw the ball. Now with the Chargers, where Greg Roman is, they've got an all Mountain West defensive tackle named Scott Matlock playing the Patrick Ricard role. I mean, so Taysom Hill can do all those things, but he can carry the ball, he can catch the ball, and he can throw the ball.
Geoff, you know what's crazy? He's 34 years old, Taysom Hill. I mean,
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, he came out late because I guess he went on a mission or
Yeah.
Yeah. So so the tape against Dallas, Greg, did the Cowboys try to counter in those packages where Taysom Hill is on the field in nickel, or were they in more of a base defense?
They kind of did a number of things because you're trying to figure it out. I mean, that's why I say I don't know how teams treat Hill, depending on who else is on the field for the Saints.
Right.
So the Cowboys played both when Hill was on the field, and I'm sure they had a plan because they played their base 4-3 with 3 linebackers. They played nickel. They played, they did a number of different things. But Hill is a really intriguing player. I mean, he's because like I said, he lines up as an eye back, and they handed him the ball just like he's a running back at times.
Right. And in the red zone, he's lethal. Really, inside the 5. Yeah. He actually caught one last week for a touchdown. But man, I've seen him take it as a shotgun quarterback and just set it up and get upfield and score. So that with all the Eagles run problems, we didn't even get to Kamara yet. Wait till we get into that.
And by the way,
well, that's why I'm asking what alignment we think the Eagles will be in because of Kamara in the run game. I'll get right back to you, Greg, because so Quentin Michael on the Q&A show on Inside the Birds, he said he didn't like the defensive front alignment because he basically called it a swim front where both Eagles defensive tackles were head up, basically. He said the 2-eye, but basically head up over the guards. And then the ends were in wide 9, leaving enormous gaps between the 2 tackles and the 2 ends for a team like Atlanta to go and run through and a great running back like Bijan Robinson to be able to exploit. And I wonder if Vic Fangio now looks at it and says, maybe that's not the right front for us to be in because
there's multiple fronts and you have to be careful. I mean, I'm not saying Quentin Michael's wrong. All I'm going to say is this. There's multiple fronts. They all have strengths. They all have weaknesses. So, in this particular game, and again, I wasn't charting every front. Maybe he did a better job of that than I did. I'm sure he did. But you can be burned in any front because every front, just like every zone coverage, has a weakness. So, I've seen a lot of guys, when teams get beat in the run game, I've seen a lot of guys on TV break down and say, well, you can't line up in this front. Well, every team lines up in a lot of different fronts. And, if guys get off blocks and make plays, the front's okay. If guys don't, we talked about this during the week about how playing laterally and getting pushed back off the line of scrimmage, whatever front you're in, if guys are getting pushed back off the line of scrimmage, you're not going to stop the run.
Right.
It's pretty simple.
Absolutely. And
if defensive tackles are pushed back into the linebacker can't make a play. It's pretty simple. Now, again, I'm simplifying, yes, to a large extent. All I'm saying is that every team lines up in the same fronts. They're multiple, but in the same fronts.
Got it. And they did do a little bit different stuff in the fourth quarter. It seemed like they started to try to slant their guys or try to figure out anything.
But those are tactics
and nothing
within
helped.
a front.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, you can do a lot of different things. Yes.
Right. Adam, you did hear out of the locker room this week that it did feel like there was some accountability on the defensive lineman's part, as Greg just said. You heard Jalen Carter described himself as trash in that game.
Well, that's good to hear.
Davis, yeah, I mean,
because through 2 weeks, he's not been an impact player.
Right. Is that surprising to you at this point? We did question Adam the pass rush, but I even though we had some questions about Jordan Davis's ability to play snaps, I didn't think that after 2 weeks we'd be worried about the interior line as much as we are.
I know, because I thought it would just be Jordan Davis, but when it's both of them, because they don't have a veteran on their D line to turn to. Moro Jones has been a nice story in the limited snaps that he gets. And Thomas Booker gave him some good snaps, but they don't have anyone else. These guys have to play. This is one thing we talked about in the spring about adding a veteran. You don't have to start him. You actually have the guy on the practice squad to have a veteran presence. They don't have that guy with Cox retiring. So it's only 2 games, but the discipline's got to be better. I'm surprised with Carter, as Greg just mentioned. I'm very surprised that he has not been like we thought he would be. He at times last season obviously was incredible. We haven't seen anything close to that so far.
Right.
Jeff, the thing to keep in mind is tactically you can do things, but when you do things tactically, also you can leave gaps open as well. I mean, you can ask your lineman to shoot gaps, which is normally not in the Vic Fangio scheme. That's not the way you normally play, shooting gaps. Okay, you can slant. You can do stunt. You run stunts. You can do run blitzes. There's a lot of things you can do. That doesn't automatically mean that they work, because those leave openings as well. So, at some point, there's a mano on mano element to playing defensive line versus offensive linemen. And that has not happened well for the Eagles in 2 games.
Yeah. Adams made a great point all throughout the offseason. It's a very surprising one about the Eagles. A surprising fact is that they're the only team in the NFL without a vested veteran, or they were. No, they still are, right? The only team in the NFL without a vested veteran on the defensive line.
We're talking about tackles, not
interior defensive line, and we're not going to count Brandon.
That is
Graham,
interesting.
Yeah, moving inside.
That's the stuff Adam knows way better than
I just look for that.
That's really interesting.
Because what it tells you is it's kind of, okay, here's what they're dealing with. We talked about in the spring. Let's see what happens. It's just because they don't have that veteran presence, that guy in the locker room. It does mean something being in locker room, Geoff. You know this. They don't have anyone to turn to for advice or, hey, how'd you handle this situation?
Yeah.
What they have is what they have. And I understand they invest.
They're counting on young guys that they drafted high.
Yeah.
Don't forget, they traded up to 13 to draft Jordan Davis. They drafted Jalen Carter 9 when no one expected, based on talent, that he'd last till 9, which was fair based on his college tape. So they're counting on first-round picks, high first-round picks, to be forces, particularly in the run game. Pass rush, we can talk about as well, but you can manufacture pass rush a little differently than you can manufacture run defense.
Yeah.
So these guys, through 2 games, small sample size again. I'm emphasizing that. Doesn't mean the whole season's going to stink, but through 2 games, it has not happened. And like I said, at some point, you got to win mano a mano.
And Geoff, there's nowhere else to turn. This is what we talked about in the spring. We knew they were going to go with these guys at the start. That was never in question. But there's nowhere else to turn. They have to produce. They don't. But Moro Jones is not going to be a starter. Okay.
Well, you never know. I mean,
Greg. If that happens, we don't want to go. We don't want to even go there.
Yeah, I'm just saying. Eventually, the best guys are going to play.
Vic will do that. Hey, on what you just said, Vic doesn't care.
No,
ask Devin White.
and Bryce
ends up being, in their mind, right or wrong, Adam. Doesn't matter what we think. We don't know half the things Vic Fangio knows. But if he feels Moro Ojomo is playing better than Jordan Davis, let's say, Moro Ojomo is going to start getting snaps.
That would be very interesting.
But what I'm saying is, if he takes the job,
that's bad in general for the Eagles, of course.
Right. Yeah,
Yes.
but Vic doesn't care about that.
No,
Right.
and I would not rule anything out on what we just talked about with Vic. He doesn't care.
No.
And
No. And by
with
the way, he shouldn't. I mean, this is not. These are not first graders. You're just trying to get them to enjoy being out there during their break. I mean, this is the NFL.
Yeah.
I mean, right? I mean,
Yes.
That's funny.
Yes. Yeah. And listen, there's a part 2 to this conversation that we had all week, and it's about the lack of pass rush. And I don't want to sit here and belabor the fact that the Eagles haven't gotten a pass rush, but I do think it's important to note, and Vic even said this in his press conference. You can't worry about the pass rush until you learn how to stop the run, because if you're not putting the offense that you're facing in third and second and long and unmanageable, as they call it, down in distances, then it doesn't even matter. You're not even getting enough opportunities to rush the passer.
Funny you say that, because you hear a lot of coaches, Adam, you've probably heard this many times in talking to coaches. You've got to earn the right to rush the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Haven't you heard that?
Exactly.
You've got to earn the right to rush the quarterback.
Yeah.
100%. So let's finish off the discussion of the Eagles defense then with a look at what Alvin Kamara is doing. I mean, this looks like it's 2019 all over again, the way he's been running over defenses,
and he's a great receiver.
Yes, always been a very good catcher.
Very quick story, Geoff, just before you get in. When
Yeah.
Adam Gase was the head coach of the Jets, and I know Adam Gase pretty well, he invited me up to a preseason game. So I drove up. So I was on the field. I actually had a great talk with Dennis Allen on the field at that preseason game. But Alvin Kamara was not going to play. But he went through his normal workout, and I was standing 10 feet away. I've never seen a human being as light on his feet as Alvin Kamara. It was literally like he was moving on air. I mean, and like I said, he wasn't to play. It was a preseason game, but it was just the way in which he moves. And you can kind of see that even when he's playing in a game, it looks like he's moving on air. I mean,
Greg, I talked to you in 2017 for the draft. I'll never forget, because we would exchange notes, and you go, "Have you heard about Alvin Kamara of Tennessee?" I said, "No, tell me about him." You were raving about him.
Yeah.
What did you love about him in college?
Well, first of all, he only had one game in his entire career of 20 or more carries. So he was not used as a foundation back. People may not know he started his career at Alabama and then transferred to Tennessee. So he was a recruited athlete. Now, we're not just talking about, a guy that came out of nowhere. But I saw the way he ran, and they split him out a lot, and you saw the receiving skills. So, again, I don't remember saying, well, he's going to be a big time foundation back, but just the traits were really high level.
Greg, last thing on the Saints offense, I wanted to ask you about the offensive line, which has not been a strongest point for them in the past. Now they draft Fuaga out of Oregon State, who everybody loved, and he's playing left tackle. Has the offense structure combined with Fuaga giving an upgrade made this offensive line look a little bit better than it might actually be, the way the San Francisco 49ers get away with having a substandard O-line because of their offense? Or is it too early to make that declaration?
It's probably too early to say, but I'd say in the run game, they played exceptionally well. And I don't think that's a mirage. Now, when I say that, look, it's a long season, you never know. But the run game part's not a mirage. I think all the play action stuff helps an O-line. There's no question it does. So you can speak to that. If they start getting into more third and must pass, pure pass situations, then we'll see, how they hold up. A lot of people felt Fuaga, who was, as I said, a right tackle at Oregon State and is now playing left tackle. Some people thought he was a guard because they didn't think he'd be a great one-on-one pass protector in pure pass situations. He hasn't had to face many of those through 2 games. We'll see. Penning is playing right tackle. He came out as a left tackle and struggled through the early part of his career. So we'll see. So that hasn't happened yet, but through the run part has been outstanding.
All right, great stuff. Let's transition now. We'll talk about this Eagles offense against the Saints defense. A defense, Adam, that has, for the last few years, been a good defense, but has had to bear the brunt of carrying an offense. What was it, just a couple of years ago that Trevor Siemian was the quarterback and came into the link, right? And I remember they had the number 1 rush defense, and the Eagles just ran all over them, but it didn't help that they couldn't move the chains offensively,
right?
Because Siemian was not very good. So you look at this defense, Dennis Allen. I have a feeling that 8 weeks, 9 weeks from now, when we talk about the Saints, we're going to be more talking about their defense than their offense, because that's really, to me, where they're strongest. The reality, when things settle and this offense isn't averaging 40 points a game, I feel like the defense is what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and the Saints play a ton of zone. They're 67% zone, like the Eagles. They're almost identical in terms of percentage. Without AJ Brown, Greg, and I know we'll never know until they actually play. I'll be interested to see what the approach is. How do they view Hurts running the football, who ran it 13 times last week? Because, okay, Devontae is a great player, but he's not AJ Brown. So I'll be interested to see what their approach is coverage wise.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know that they play. Actually, the Saints play a lot of man coverage too. I mean, they're in terms of playing cover one,
Okay.
they're not at the top of the league. They're mid range, but they play a lot of two man. So that's something they do near the top of the league every year. Is they play a lot of two man coverage.
Mm-hmm.
They have really good players at all three levels of their defense, guys. I mean,
Love their linebackers, Greg.
this is a really good defense, a really good defense. I mean, and now if Lattimore goes, they're really solid at corner. It's only been 2 games, but I don't know if you guys have noticed him. I have, and I loved him coming out too. Alontae Taylor has played as well as any slot corner in the league. That guy is really a good football player, and he was an outside corner at Tennessee, and I loved him coming out.
Did you notice McKinstry last week?
Yeah, he played well. Yeah, he played right corner at Debo State, but Lattimore will be back this week.
Yes, yeah.
Adam,
I'm curious. Okay.
it's very possible, Adam, that their zone stats are very heavy right now because they've been up so big in two games.
True.
They're a man. They're
Yeah.
more, and again, because of Jalen, you don't know. Okay,
That's why I brought it up.
Right.
Yeah.
But they're more a man team than a zone team normally, and not by a wide margin. It's not like 80% man, but they're more of a man team schematically than a zone team. But we've only played 2 games, and they've been up so big in both games that my guess is that they play more zone.
Sure, fair enough.
But now they're playing a quarterback that can run, and we'll see how they choose to do that.
Well, two-man, Greg, right? You would think if you want to play man, but you're playing against a mobile quarterback, two-man's a pretty good identity to have because at least your safeties have their eyes going
but their
forward.
safeties are playing deep.
Right.
You usually don't play two-man against a running quarterback. I mean, if you're concerned about, unless you maybe spy them, which
right.
and because normally on third down they play dime, and they play 2 versions of dime. They'll play 4-1-6 with 4 down linemen and Demario Davis as the only linebacker, and he's a really good player still. And they'll play 3-2-6 dime with 3 down linemen and Davis and Werner as the 2 linebackers. So in that iteration, they can spy from that if they want to play man behind it and rush 3 and use either Davis or Warner as a spy.
Greg, I want to ask you about Davis, who I first saw at the Senior Bowl. I was able to meet Mario a couple of years ago. He actually showed up for a reunion at the Senior Bowl, and I can't believe he's 35. It's one of these things like
I doesn't miss a snap.
I don't know what happened with him with the Browns and Jets and why they moved on, but he's been with the Saints. This is his 7th year with them. What makes him so good?
Well, he's totally multidimensional. He can do anything. And I remember talking with Dennis Allen a few years ago, and he said he's a major part of our pressure schemes. He's a very good blitzer. He can still run and cover down the field. They have some really cool zone pressure schemes in which he's really good at matching zone match because they're very big on that zone match concepts. He's just a really good football player. He's one of the best 3 down linebackers in the league. He's not Fred Warner, but he's that kind of player in terms of how he's deployed.
Yeah, 35 years old. It's incredible.
Are they using him a little differently? He used to blitz quite a bit, but is he still?
Well, it's only been 2 games, and like I said, because they've been ahead so much, they don't have to blitz a lot. They've gotten to the second half of these games, and they don't really have to try to pressure a lot.
Right.
So, but no, he'll blitz if he's part of their pressure schemes, particularly in dime.
Yeah, interesting. They went out and signed Willie Gay from the Chiefs,
who only plays in base.
Yeah, that's weird. They gave him a decent contract for someone who's only going to play in base. So that's
Warner's a good player.
Yeah,
Warner's 6'3", 245. He's a big, long, athletic kid. I mean, he obviously beat him out to play in their nickel.
Yeah. All right. That's my limit for how much good we're going to talk about in Ohio State.
Yeah, people are going to say, why are you guys so much? Jeez. Yeah.
No Ohio State, no Michigan. No, I'm just kidding. But no, so they have a very good defensive front. But what sticks out to me right now, how are they using Cam Jordan? Because he's been a staple of that defense for so long. Yeah. But now they have some new edge. They've got Granderson. They have Brizet. They have other guys on the edge.
They have Chase Young, who's looked good through 2 games.
Yeah. So how are they making that work?
Well, what they do at times in their dime in their sub fronts is Young and Granderson will be on the outside and Jordan moves inside, which is a really smart idea. So that's the way they use Jordan at times. I mean, he's a defensive end, obviously, most of the time, but you start getting into dime and he'll move inside at times, and that gives him an extra pass rusher. But Young has looked good through 2 games. Young's pass rush traits are really speed to Bauer conversion. He's not a bender. He's a little stiff, but he's got speed to power, and that's what you have to be concerned about.
So the Eagles' offensive line is pass protected. I think we'd all agree fairly well through 2 games. They go down, they face another good front. I don't have concerns about them holding up in
I don't
pass
think that's been
pro.
an issue, quite
Yeah,
frankly.
no, I don't. But I do have some concern, guys. And Adam, we talked about this on the pod a little, just about the communication between center and right guard in a place that is going to be as loud and raucous as the Superdome is. Because even though there was some level of crowd noise that you had to deal with in Brazil, it wasn't necessarily "we hate you, we're going to make as much noise while you have the ball" as you're going
Sure.
to hear in the Superdome. And so communication is going to be at a key here for this new sort of right guard center combination.
No, there's no doubt. This is the first time they're going to be in a hostile environment. It's only game 3 for those 2 guys, right guard and center. It's Becton. It's been a good story so far. I know Greg has spoke well of him so far. It looks good. I'm fascinated to hear the crowd noise thing, because the worst thing they could do, Geoff, is get down early. That boy, if they could score first, woo,
I
that would
agree.
help.
I mean, just a thought, and again, I don't know
Yeah,
how coaches think about this. As you
sure.
were just talking about, it just popped into my head.
Yeah.
What you could see is some tempo first sound stuff, just so they don't have to stand there and let the crowd get all worked up. You know, you could. I mean, obviously, you're not going to play the whole game that way, but I mean, you could see that in selected drives or selected moments where they go tempo, first sound, boom, snap the ball.
By the way,
Right.
they did that in training camp. They ran a decent amount of tempo. So have they run any of that a little bit so far,
Not
Greg?
a lot if they
Yeah.
have. I mean,
Yeah.
let's put it this way. It hasn't stood out to me.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, so I don't want to say they haven't done any
Right,
of
but
it,
they
but it
did
hasn't
some in
stood
training
out.
camp, and because we haven't really seen much of it, I'm like, okay, it's only 2 games.
I mean, they could get right to the line of scrimmage,
Yeah,
have Becton or Dickerson, tap Jurgens and snap the ball. Boom, let's go.
Yeah.
right, interesting. Okay,
Yep. One
okay,
way to
good.
counter the crowd noise. That is a good
Mhm.
way to do it. I have a feeling this may not be the type of Saquon Barkley game that the Eagles have had the first 2 weeks where Saquon's been really good, because I have respect, a healthy respect for this front six, if you want to call it that, for the Saints. Greg, is that, I mean, again, they've been their gift has been they've been in blowouts, so their offense has
Right.
been helping them
And
out.
that's why it's hard to know what happens if by chance it's a close game. You don't know, you
Right.
know. Yeah,
But they've had in the past, the Saints have had a very good. They're seemingly in the top 5, top 10
no,
rushing
they're good.
defense
Well, they have good
every
players
year.
and they're good. And
Yeah,
by the way, I mean, I've talked to offensive coaches through the years, his scouting combine, phone conversations, and they'll tell you Dennis Allen's one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. Now, whether he's calling, I don't know if he calls the defense, but it's his defense.
right,
I
right.
mean, so I've heard that from many different offensive coaches.
And Greg, one more guy, because nobody talks about him. He's been an incredible story. And we're giving the Saints a lot of love, but we want people to understand what the Eagles are up against. This Carl Granderson came out of nowhere 5 years ago. What are your thoughts on him?
He's been a really good pass rusher. They just gave him big money too, Adam, didn't
Yep,
they?
yep. Former undrafted free agent. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, that's one reason they moved Jordan inside and in a lot of sub fronts because
Okay.
Granderson can rush the quarterback. But again, you know, look, the Saints. I spoke to someone at the Eagles, and he said to me, the Saints have really good players at all 3 levels of their defense. So we're not going to sit here and say they're the Legion of Boom or the 2000 Ravens
Sure.
or the 85 Bears, but they have good players. Now, does
Right.
that mean they're not beatable? Of course not. But it's a good defense. It's well schemed with good players. It's not an easy defense to play against.
Right. So 2 years ago, when these two teams played and the Saints did have the number one rush defense, the Eagles chewed them up. If you guys remember, they ran for over 200 and something
Didn't
yards
hurt
on the
wasn't Hurts a
ground.
big factor in that game
I
running the
was
ball?
just
Oh
about to
yeah.
bring that up. This
Yeah.
is not the same offense, and Jalen Hurts is scrambling more than running design. He's had some design runs, but they have not gone well. Defensive
Teams have
have
taken that
clearly
away.
caught
It
on.
seems
Yeah,
even
they've
going
taken that
back to
away.
last year that the design runs with Hurts have not done. Don't forget there's more and more tape too.
Right. Right. So there's clearly a tell, right? Like for example, when the Eagles go spread and they put five out there, that's the key sometimes to the linebacker. Oh, he's going to snap it, look, and then take off up the middle because they've got to spread out. So they've been doing things that give it away. It feels like it's incumbent upon Kellen Moore here, unless he just doesn't want to use it as much, to try to figure out different ways to get Jalen Hurts back into becoming a designed run threat if he feels that that's part of the offense. When he had Dak was really starting to evolve into a passer. I don't think that they really leaned on Dak as a
Well, they
design
did
runner, right?
situationally. They did in
Okay.
the red zone quite a bit, and it was a factor. And they might have done it on 3rd and 2, in the middle of the field, but it wasn't really foundationally a part of their offense. It
Right.
was very situational.
Right. All right. So let's get into this quarterback in the passing game. We mentioned no AJ Brown, using different players. Greg, if there's going to be one guy here who needs to be accentuated more in the passing game beyond the quarterback, getting the ball to him, who is it going to be?
Well, I always struggle with the fact that I think Dallas Goedert is a really, really good player, and I just, you know, I never come across. I hope people understand is if I know more than the coaches, so that's not my point at all. But you're dealing with a guy that is a high level traits tight end. I'm not going to get into a list. Oh, he's the third best, the fourth. He's a
Sure.
high level traits tight end,
Mm-hmm.
and it just seems to me that he needs to be more of a volume target. Now, I understand when Brown's healthy and Smith's there, and it's hard to have three guys who are all high volume targets, particularly in an offense where you want to run the ball with some volume as well. But I just feel like Goddard is not utilized to what his traits are, that he
Mm-hmm.
can be a real factor in the pass game. And I, I can't remember when he's been a factor consistently. Like he's had games, where you go, hey man, that's Dallas Goedert, and he's really good.
Right.
But it doesn't feel like on a weekly basis he's a big. And now this is a new staff, and we've only played 2 games, But I'm trying to figure out as they go forward how Dallas Goedert can be a big factor.
It's interesting. I don't have the numbers in front of me. I know that there's like metrics and analytics and snap counts. I don't have the alignment counts in front of me, but I almost feel like the regime, the Doug Peterson regime, to
Right.
use Dallas Goedert more as a boundary guy in a 1-by-3, right, by himself on that backside
I'd love to
than
see more of that in this
than
game.
you've seen
Hmm.
under Sirianni and now Kellen Moore, which again is
Yeah.
just 2 games, but that's sort of surprising to me.
The other thing too, and I remember having a great conversation with an offensive coach who's been in the league forever about 1-by-3 sets. He said they're really, really good too because they force the defense in many ways. Nothing's 100% in the league, but they force the defense in many ways to declare how they're going to play, and they give the quarterback more information before the snap of the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Because who goes out over a tight end if it's 1-by-3 with the tight end as the single receiver to the boundary and 3 wide receivers to the wide side of the field? Okay. Who goes out over Goddard? If a corner is out there, you're probably thinking that they're playing zone, okay? Because that means that there's a linebacker or a safety with number 3 to trips, number 3 being the closest guy to the formation. Put Devontae Smith at number 3 to trips because he's your fastest guy. Put speed at number 3, okay, and then see how they're going to play that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Good way to
we're
think
we're
about it.
we're waiting for that. We're waiting for that. And Adam, I know you're waiting for a little bit more of a concerted effort to get the ball to the running backs.
I mean, Barkley got the ball 4 times last week, which is encouraging, but somewhere on checkdowns, I want to see more design plays to him. But one thing about with Goddard, though, we have seen the last 2 years, there have been plays he's been open and Hurts, like last week, moves, he doesn't see him. That's frustrating too. So that's real. Like that, he's
Mm-hmm.
got to get the football. Greg's right. He's also a matchup. He's so explosive with the ball in his hands. We
Yeah,
know
I mean,
that. It's tough.
look, at the end of the day, and this is just fact, and
Yeah.
I know because they've been to a Super Bowl, there's a sense that this is a great offense and all, but Jalen Hurts at his core is not a true timing rhythm player. Now, does that mean he can never play that way? Of course not. He's a starting NFL quarterback and he's a good player. But at his core, he's not necessarily that kind of player. He can have
Right.
games like that. And, so he had, to my way of thinking, I think that he needs to become more like that, which doesn't mean that you're going to take away his ability to use his legs. But there needs to be a sense. I have this conversation with Kevin Foley, who works on my matchup show. Kevin was a quarterback at Cherry Hill East, big time recruit back, years ago, coached in college by Clyde Christensen. I mean, he knows the quarterback position. And we talk about this all the time about, hitting your back foot and ball should come out. I mean, that's the way it's all coached. Everything is coached to get the ball to the primary. Now, obviously in the NFL, that doesn't happen 100% of the time. There are coaches who are better than others at doing that. And that really helps quarterbacks. You're seeing that right now in Minnesota with Sam Darnold. Sam Darnold looks like a different guy. Now, of course, it's only 2 games, but Kevin O'Connell's really good coaching quarterbacks and schemes. And boy, Darnold, ball hits his back foot, the ball's out. You'd like to see that more. Now, I'm not there every day, so I don't know if Kellen Moore is trying to figure that out. I don't know if it's Jalen Hurts. We don't know the answer, but you'd like to see more of that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Greg, he's a little bit of a conundrum to watch, Jalen Hurts, because his numbers against the blitz are very good, and he seems to know exactly what he wants to do when he sees and knows a blitz is coming,
Right.
and does a great job of getting the ball to the I don't want to call it the hot, but wherever he decides he
Right.
wants to go. It almost seems like in reverse. Most quarterbacks, the biggest thing they want is time and protection. But sometimes when he has time and he's protected, and it's not there right away in his vision, that's when he starts to move and drift and bail when he doesn't have to. It almost feels like, and I thought 2 years ago he did so much better a job climbing the pocket just to
Right.
give himself that extra time, but he has sort of reverted back into leaving the pocket to his right a lot. And now you're seeing teams, I think, sort of force him that way and not even having to use 7 guys to do it.
No, well, they force him that way with one guy and then have another guy in position that he can't turn the corner and
Right.
run. And
Right.
that's, so look, it's a work in progress. New coordinator, new coaching, new staff. You can talk about off season and training camp all you want. Until you get into the games, you got to figure it out, because now defenses are playing and matching up, and they have a lot of tape, and they know the strengths and weaknesses. And so now it becomes every pass game is a marriage of scheme and quarterback. Every
Right.
pass game.
Right.
So, you have to work through all that.
I feel like there's going to have to be another player, though, along with Jalen Hurts seeing it. But whether it's so they tried to get Britton Covey more involved in almost as a pseudo running game by throwing him, the into the flat really quick. It didn't work out. Atlanta keyed on it very well. Jahan Dotson was out there quite a bit, but he wasn't productive because the ball really didn't come to him. Johnny Wilson is dealing with a hamstring. We'll see. He was listed, I believe, as probable on the report, so he's expected to play, but you just don't know what you're going to get. But when I mention these 3 names, I don't think these are names that are keeping defensive coordinators awake at night. Adam, Britton Covey's healthy, or he caught 6 passes.
No.
The Eagles right now, to me, are caught in a tough spot because they're going on the road against a good defense without all of their artillery.
Listen, when you talk to defensive coaches, because they'll tell you, you guys have had these conversations. Okay, who are you worried about this week? Okay, in this case, I'm sure the Saints are saying, okay, let's make sure we are aware of Devontae Smith. After that, okay, let's go to the running game in Barkley and Goddard. Obviously, he's always capable. You know he's there. They don't throw it to him enough, but he's there. And when he gets it, he's tough when he gets the ball in his hands. So it's Smith and Goddard. One of these games, whether it's this week or next week when they play the Bucks, if AJ Brown doesn't play against the Bucks, Goddard's got to be a factor. Like he has to be. Now, Dotson, I know we talked about him
he just got there
too.
Weeks. So yeah, I mean,
I get it. He's new to this offense. He's got to learn yet another scheme. But again, there was a reason why Washington didn't want him on the football team, folks. Well, they weren't going to cut him if they couldn't trade him, but they didn't want him.
Right.
So,
and this is the physical. This is a physical Saints defense too. This is not like the finesse Saints defense. And
by the way,
guys will hit you.
Greg mentioned Alontae Taylor. He's one of the tallest nickels. He's about 6 feet. So
good point.
It ain't gonna be easy.
And he is physical and competitive. But I mean, Adam makes a great point. without AJ Brown, let's say that Hurts has to drop back 35 times, just for the sake of discussion.
Sure.
It seems to me, because your two reliable receivers at this point would be Smith and Goddard, correct?
Mm-hmm.
They should have 17, 18, 19, 20 targets between them.
Right.
I mean, Goddard can't come out of this game with 5 targets.
Well, guess what? He had 1 target until the fourth quarter.
Yeah, see,
That's almost inconceivable.
that's why, look, as I've said many times, I don't rip coaches because I'm not there. I'm not part of the process.
Right.
But your word is correct, Geoff. That's inconceivable.
Right. They've got to get in more. If they're going to win this game, and we'll get to our predictions in a second, they absolutely have to get more out of Goddard. They have to get more out of Jalen Hurts, getting the ball to Goddard, getting the ball to Smith, and then finding a third guy who can just help you move the chains. And that's also a big part of the responsibility of Kellen Moore.
That's where the scheme and the marriage, as I said, that's where it comes into play.
100%.
Lesser players means more tactics.
There you go. All right. Offensively, we've gone up against the. By the way, last thing on the two-man defense. Maybe I should reconsider a Barkley, because normally when you see two high safeties, you want to run. But I do, again, have a healthy respect for the Saints front six. But how do offenses normally attack a team that plays two-man?
Well, it's a man concept. So,
crossing routes then, or rub routes.
You're trying to run away from man. But you have to remember one thing. When it's two-man, you can undercut the routes. So in other words, the corners don't necessarily play on top of the receiver. They can undercut or tailgate because they've got help over the top. Two-man is a great defense to play. It really makes it harder to make certain throws. So, again, I don't know if they'll do that because of the running factor, unless they do that with a spy. We'll see.
All right, we will. Let's get to the my favorite part of this show, because I am clearly killing you guys after 2 weeks, as I am 2-0 in these predictions and you guys are both 0-2. I'm not used to being ahead of you guys in the standings, right? So let's see if your fortunes can change. We're going to pick the score of the game. We're going to pick the winner. And of course, we're going to pick the game MVP. Adam, I'll start with you. How do you see this game unfolding, and who is going to be the MVP of the game?
Yeah, look, it's going to be tough without AJ Brown, right? It's really tough. The Eagles just have been so inconsistent. The Saints look like world beaters. Yeah, like you said on our show this week, Geoff. At some point, the Saint offense will cut. It's going to come down to earth, but it's not going to happen this week. This is a good time to catch up to play the Eagles. Eventually, Vic will figure it out with his coaches. But I got it. The Saints 27, the Eagles 17.
Saints 27. Eagles 17. Is this the first time in a long time you picked against the Eagles 2 straight weeks?
Yeah, I just the thing that shocks me is that the Saints are only a 3-point number. I know the Eagles are sort of like a national team.
Yeah.
I would have had, my line would have been -5 for the Saints, but okay.
I definitely would have at least given them 3.5. I was shocked by it as well. Who did you have as the game MVP then?
Oh, I'm gonna go. Oh, I have to. Alvin Kamara. That turf. He's been reborn. Greg, by the way, I forgot to ask you this just real quick. Last year, did you think he lost a step? What was, I know he did well in the car checked the ball down a lot, but did he look like he lost a step last year?
Not really.
Okay. Still look good. Okay.
Awesome.
Who's a better player, Kamara or Barkley?
You tell me. I don't know.
I mean, if you measure them at their best,
I had that conversation with someone this week, and they didn't blink, and they said Kamara.
I mean, he's a far better runner as far as through traffic and contact balance than Barkley.
He's got unbelievable contact balance.
Yeah,
crazy.
Yeah. One of the best.
Anyway, so is it my turn, Geoff?
It is. What you got, Greg?
Well, all we have is 2 weeks. Things can change dramatically. So based on 2 weeks, I'm going to pick the Saints. Now, I don't think they're going to score 40 this week, but, I'm going to pick the Saints, and I'm going to say it's going to be a little lower scoring than you might think. Now, not 13-10 or anything like that, but I'm going to go, I can't remember what Adam picked, but
27-17.
Oh, I was going to pick 27-20.
Okay.
27-20 New Orleans.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm going to pick it. I wanted to pick Kamara. Adam picked Kamara, but I'm going to pick Chris Olave.
Olave. There you go. Good stuff. All right. Well, I'm 2-0, and I'm going to put my 2-0 on the line here. I'm also going to go with the Saints. I really wrestled with this, guys, because I have a golden rule about not trying to use the week before as some kind of barometer as what's going to happen the next week. We just talked about that.
And
I
I
also
agree with
don't.
that. I
I also
struggled a bit with that. I agree with that.
Yeah, I don't like to judge a team on its lowest point or its highest point, and I feel like right now the Eagles are at their low point. I mean, it's only 2 weeks, but if you go back to last year, they had some issues, and the Saints are just high flying, and they of course are not going to average 40 points a game, but
Yeah.
I think the injury to AJ Brown really makes a huge difference on the road in a loud environment when you're already struggling offensively to try to get it done. And I'm worried about the number of hits that Jalen Hurts has been taking just running. And I'm not saying he's going to get hurt, but I just think he's doing a little bit too much right now. So I'm going to take the Saints to win a close one, 26-20. I am going to go. Not obvious. I'm going to go Shaheed on
Okay.
the MVP. I mean, he's had a great start.
Well,
I worry about the lack of pass rush. I think there's a reason
Yeah.
to be worried about it, and he's the guy that can really take the top off. Not that Olave can't, but Shaheed's been the guy so far. So that's my MVP of the game.
You know, this is the week where it's looking at some of these games, because obviously I do the matchup show, where I feel like some unexpected stuff's going to happen. Teams that are pretty good, like the Eagles are not a bad team. Now, we know some guys are not playing well and all that, but even like I look at Jaguars, Bills, okay, Trevor Lawrence, believe it or not, has lost 7 consecutive starts as the starting quarterback going to let, but there's a part of me that thinks they're going to go into Buffalo and that could be an upset. This is the week where I think you're going to see a few strange things happen, and the Eagles could be one of them.
The way Jacksonville's playing, Greg, I think I feel more confident of the Eagles maybe stealing a win.
No, I know, but I mean, you know what I'm
No,
saying.
I know
get
what
it.
you're
No,
saying.
I'm not saying I would pick that because
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
pick
Right.
games anyway, other than this.
Right.
But I just feel like it's at some point teams that have good players are going to play well enough to win games.
Hey, you know what? To your point, all three of us picking the Saints to win clearly means the Eagles are going to win this game 52-12. So that's about it.
Right.
It's a weird league, man. So
Yeah.
It
weird.
is.
Yeah.
It is. All right. It's been fun. That's going to do it for this edition of Inside the Birds pregame show for Greg Cosell and Adam Caplan. I'm Geoff Mosher. Everybody enjoy your football watching. Catch you on the next one.